Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. It's a holiday this week. We weren't sure whether we would do a live stream, but we decided why not. I would come on. We haven't got a scheduled special guest this evening. A couple of people might come and join me later. We'll see if they pop up. Time will tell. But there'll be plenty of opportunity to interact with comments this evening. I'm often frustrated. I don't do as much of that as I would like to. So do fire comments in this evening, and I'll be able to respond to those much more fully than usual. Now, something we've talked about with the live stream that's never actually happened yet is the possibility, if you're not just making comments, but actually coming on screen and giving your point of view on something or asking a question. We'll maybe try that later on this evening. We'll see how it goes. I'll maybe put the link in the comments, and then you can click on it and you will appear on the screen as part of the live stream. We'll do that maybe just as a little experiment later on. We shall see. We shall see, I say. But do fire the comments in. I'll start with a bit of news as usual. Family party news. Now, our three by-election candidates are swinging into action. There is, I was going to say an action day, an action weekend in Aberdeen this coming Saturday and Sunday. I'm going to go up on Saturday. Michael Willis is going up as well. I think Neil Deaton-Rain, and then we're going to join the people in Aberdeen, do some leafleting, maybe make a video or two, some other things we might do as well. Then we've got Richard, that's Amy Stratton, our candidate in Aberdeen. Richard Fettis, our candidate in Edinburgh. There'll be dates probably soon where you can go along and help Richard, leafleting. And then we also have Nikki Willis in a Stirling Council ward. And again, there'll be time for you can go and help delivering leaflets there as well. So the leaflets are all printed. We're gearing up for that. Richard Fettis' leaflet in Edinburgh. I really like the front cover of it because in Edinburgh, the schools have gone vegan. So for your lunch at school, you can only get vegan food. So on the front of his leaflet, it says, in Edinburgh schools, a boy can choose to be a girl, but he can't choose chicken for lunch. And that is the state of play. A boy can choose to be a girl, and they'll keep that a secret from the parents. You can do that, absolutely. But if the boy wants to choose to have chicken, no, definitely not. That's just too far as far as the Edinburgh schools are concerned. Right. Good evening, commenters. That's good to see you. The Mary, the Raymond, etc. Right now, so keep your eye open on social media to see when you can help out with those candidates. Also, our candidate training for the Westminster election started a couple of weeks ago on Friday. I think we had about 25 people there, which is fantastic, a Zoom meeting. And there's another one this Friday. If you're interested, email campaignmanager@scottishfamily.org, campaignmanager, all one word, @scottishfamily.org, and he will give you the information you need, give you the link. You can log in and come and join us. The session on Friday this week is about handling interviews and hustings, that sort of question time type events. So it's going to be mainly talking about it. For a little bit of fun at the end, we might do a little bit, like go into small groups and, ask a few, put a few people on the spot, ask them a question, whatever, just to see how they get along with that. So if you're remotely interested, if you wanted to explore the possibility of being a candidate, then email campaignmanager@scottishfamily.org and join in. What we say with the training is a lot of people think, I'm not sure I'm up to it, not sure I know enough, not sure I'll be able to do that. Well, what we're intending to do with the training is take you from wherever you are in terms of your confidence at the moment or your knowledge, abilities, whatever, and try and move you along. So you're thinking, well, maybe I could do a bit more. Maybe I could do that. And then we'll see where that leads. We've got quite a few candidates already written next to constituency names around the country. So we're getting things sorted out well in advance for the Westminster election, whenever that might be. Hope there's some real food outlets outside the schools or meat sandwiches and packed lunches. Yeah, what's going to happen, obviously, is less children in Edinburgh are going to have school meals. Now, I think there's already a rule, isn't there? Is it even a law that you're not allowed to park a burger van within a certain radius of a school or something? I think there is some sort of rule like that. What I just find really, I'm quite annoyed about it, actually. There's this like banning meat in Edinburgh schools. It's like taking indoctrination a step further, because I'm sure the curriculum itself is heavily skewed towards you should be a vegetarian, you should be a vegan. Okay, I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with that particularly, but just the fact that the curriculum would be basically trying to indoctrinate pupils into that in any case, in the name of sort of environmentalism. But to actually make the decision on behalf of the pupils what they're allowed to eat, then that's just taking it a step further in my view. So I'm not very happy about that at all. So let's hope lots of other people in Costoffen and Murrayfield feel the same, and they'll see Richard Fetters' leaflet and think, yeah, absolutely, I'm going to vote against that. Now, I think with council elections, I was reading something this week, that in Scotland in particular, it tends to be for a lot of people, they support independence, so they vote for the SNP. Or they don't support independence, so they vote for the Conservative, or if they're left-wing, they vote Labour. And that's as far as it goes. So, for example, all of the anti-car measures that are going on in cities around Scotland, do the population really want them overall? No. I don't think they really do. So why don't they vote against the parties that do it? Because in Scotland, the tendency is, if you're a unionist, you vote for these parties. If you're a nationalist, you vote for those parties. So whether or not they put a load of bollards on your street and stop you parking your car and make it a nightmare to get around your city, it doesn't seem to affect the way people vote very much. So a challenge for parties such as the Scottish Family Party is to encourage voters to look beyond constitutional issues. I heard the phrase recently, constitutional idolatry. Right, there's a term to conjure with. So discuss, is there such a thing as constitutional idolatry? I would suggest from a religious point of view, if people are willing to sacrifice the value of human life, even, if people are willing to sacrifice the value of human life on the altar of the Constitution, then maybe constitutional idolatry is a very apt term. Right, good evening, people. As I see comments coming in. Do bring up any topics you'd like to discuss. Right, bottle recycling. That's been in the news a little bit, hasn't it? You've been following that. Now, when it comes to recycling glass, recycling bottles, I mean, doesn't virtually everyone do that already? Now, the Greens, obviously, they want to have these things where you have to take the bottle back and put it in a machine at the shop and you get your 20 pence back. I mean, do we really want that extra job in our lives to get 20 pence back? Is that really an effective use of people's time and all the energy that's going to go into organising this and making these machines, etc., to do it? The extra cost on businesses, the extra cost on the general public. Is it really going to be worth it? I don't really know. I suspect not. What I tend to think with the Scottish government, it's like if you imagine you had a really serious disease, very, very serious illness, it's spread into different parts of your body, and a beautician comes along, and they can make your nails better, or then cut your hair, or whatever, pluck your eyebrows, or whatever needs doing, but they've got no idea of actually getting to grips with the real fundamental problems. And I think that's what the Scottish government's like. So the Scottish government's like, they want to tinker around the edges to make things look nice, make it look like they're doing the right sort of things, the sort of things they like talking about or saying, look what we're doing. When it comes to actually getting to the heart of the important issues in Scotland, like the economy, for example, like supporting businesses, running the NHS, running education, they're nowhere. They're nowhere. No idea. And so I think the bottle return scheme, it seems like it's going to be a disaster on its way. That will be one of the flagship policies of the Green Party in government. So let's keep an eye on that, see how it goes. And something else you'll have seen in the news was a sort of transgender teenager murdered somewhere in England, which is very sad, obviously. But you can see what happens in the media. It's the attitude is, right, transgender teenagers being killed, right, this is really great for our cause. Let's get on it. Let's exploit this to the maximum possible extent. Even though we don't know the motive, even though we don't know where this person was murdered because they were transgender. But the strategy is, and the media is entirely amenable to this strategy, the strategy is to exploit the emotional power of someone being murdered to push your agenda. It's the George Floyd tactic as well. It's been used time and time again. And it only ever seems to be used in the media on sort of left-wing progressive causes. Remember the young boy who drowned was he a Syrian refugee? And the picture of him, limp dead in the arms of a rescuer being carried, that image was going around the world. I mean, normally they don't show images of dead bodies in the media, but they make an exception for that one. With George Floyd, I mean, was there any evidence that there's racism involved? Certainly at the point where the issue exploded around the world, there was no evidence that racism was a factor. Similar with other murders as well. If there's a murder that fits the narrative of the progressive left, then it becomes a massive, massive story. And it's used in a way to say, basically, if you disagree with our cause, this is what you're causing. This is the result of your opinions. You could equally well play the game in the opposite direction, but the media is not so interested in that. So I say with this transgender teenager, we're seeing exactly that effect coming into play. I mean, the classic example of this, going back, I think where we're going back, the 90s, maybe late 90s, Matthew Shepard, who allegedly was killed in a sort of homophobic attack. He's been sort of idolized since then. He is buried alongside, I understand, alongside American presidents in the sort of official national cemetery there. And there's organizations named after him, etc., etc. Apparently, now, this is disputed, but apparently the person who killed him was someone who had been in a homosexual relationship with him, and it was about to dispute over a drug deal. So absolutely nothing to do with alleged homophobia. Apparently, one or both of the boys were sort of gay prostitutes as well. So the reality of the story, totally different than the way it was exploited, which was look what's happening to gay people, therefore we need various legislation to protect them, etc., etc. And that campaign started. Yeah, I mean, is this the right way to? I mean, say these campaigns start basically before the bodies are cold, before there's any information about what's actually gone on. The propaganda machine is in overdrive, and they say the media just seem to welcome it with open arms. They surely must realize what's happening, but they welcome it with open arms, and that's what happens. So you'll have, a George Floyd. So that's a big step forward for a certain ideology of race, like critical race theory. It takes a massive leap forward on the back of one particular incident. And that's what's always tending to happen. And we're just at the beginning of one of those as well, with this murder victim. And a lot of people will be thinking, okay, the transgender cause has had a bit of a setback in Scotland, but right, we can really redress the balance here and straighten this out. I mean, just, yeah, I completely agree. I think that the news media, when they present with these stories, they must know what's going on. They can't be so unaware as to believe that they're merely reporting the news. They must know that they're being used to further an agenda. They absolutely must do. Okay. Yes. Yeah, because maybe the fear affects the media as well, because it's a sort of moral, emotional blackmail, isn't it? If you don't support our cause, then you're effectively saying that you don't care about this murder, whereas everyone will care about the murder. I mean, you probably struggle to find more than a handful of people in the whole of Scotland who are actually not, upset and sort of outraged or whatever by someone being murdered. But they try and make out that if you don't agree with them, then somehow you're condoning it. You're happy to cause these sorts of crimes. Now, just to add on with that, if we think about the Isla Bryson incident, this is the transgender prisoner who basically had she arrived at the perfect time as far as the opposition parties were concerned in Scotland. Because it was just as the British government, UK government, had blocked the Scottish government's gender recognition reform bill. As soon as that had happened, then this ideal case emerged of a double racist claiming to be a woman. And then there was that photograph came out. I mean, let's not go into details, but it showed quite clearly that it wasn't a woman. Just perfect timing. Now, actually, the fact that an individual case came along at the right time, that shouldn't actually make any difference to public opinion, should it? It shouldn't make any difference. But it takes things to grab the public imagination or emotional or whatever to get that response from them. Whereas ideally, just presenting the argument should do the trick. Under this system, a man, no matter what crimes he's committed, could declare himself to be a woman, and then there's the possibility he could go to a women's prison, and we don't think that's a good idea. That should be enough. It shouldn't need an example, really. Certainly the government and the opposition parties, they shouldn't need an example. They should be able to work it out in the abstract. Sometimes they're not so good at that. Yes, I would agree. I think now, I was talking to someone earlier on today. They were saying, "Oh yeah, Sturgeon's really under pressure over this gender recognition reform business." Absolutely true. But then I thought, remember the named person scheme and the campaign about that, against that. The campaign became huge, didn't it? Massive media attention. I remember going to a public meeting in Edinburgh run by the No to Name Person campaign, and there must have been 300 or 400 people at it in the middle of a weekday in Edinburgh. So massive support for the campaign. The government totally humiliated, slated by the Supreme Court, and the whole thing fell to bits. Now, you might have thought then, that's going to be the end of Sturgeon. This is a major disaster for the government. But they just seem to move on, continuing the same ideology of state interference in family life, I have to say. And they sort of got away with this. Will the same thing happen with the gender recognition bill? Will there be this huge fuss, but then it will fade away into the background? People will forget about it. Because, hey, at the end of the day, what's the important thing? It's independence or the union. So it sort of doesn't matter. We'll forget about it. Quite a few people are saying they don't think this one's going to go away. I'm not so sure. I would say I don't know. We shall see. We shall see. Now, let's look at what we've got here. The SFP were ghoulish. This is your worst yet. Disgusting to exploit the murder of a young girl. No concern for their family. Right. Wherever you start for that. I mean, that how that is possibly a rational response to anything I've said, I cannot possibly imagine. So, Anne, if you'd like to explain what you're thinking there a little bit more clearly, I can try and answer. But at the moment, that just seems to bear no relationship, has no connection at all with anything at all that I've said. So if you would like to expand further, then I'd be very interested in that. Then I want to worry about alien police. That's been interesting, isn't it? These things shot down over America and some in other countries as well. The Americans, I saw one report. Did it say it didn't seem to have any means of propulsion, the thing that they shot down? So how was it up there? Was it something that was just like fired from a gun or dropped from something? I don't know. It all sounds very mysterious. I'm not at all convinced about the existence of extraterrestrial life, but yeah, watch this space. Right, Carrie, thank you very much. Yeah, we certainly are different. Our philosophy is very different from the other parties. I'll tell you what, I find a little bit frustrating at the moment. I would imagine if you ask the average person in Scotland, tell me about this transgender issue, they'd probably say, oh yeah, the SNP tried to have this gender recognition reform, but the Conservatives stopped it. The Conservatives are the ones on the other side of the argument. I say that's it's a little bit frustrating, really, because that's not really true. The SNP are here, and the Conservatives are here, and the family party is here. Because the Conservatives are saying, yeah, man can become a woman. That's fine. That's what the law says. It already says that. We're absolutely fine with that, unless they're a rapist or a sex offender. Rapists and sex offenders can't become women, but anyone else can. Now, is that really a rational position? I suggest not. The Scottish Family Party says no one can change sex. It's just impossible, full stop. There should be no such thing as a Gender Recognition Act. We need to repeal the one that we've already got, let alone changing it. So the Conservatives are just taking the very slightly different from the SNP position. But in public perception, they're regarded as the other side of the argument, which is a little frustrating, but we just need to keep working on that. GB News giving her a hammering. GB News. Any of you watch GB News? Phone them up, write to them emails, say to them why the Scottish Family Party not on anymore. We were on quite a bit when they first started, but since then we haven't been on at all, which is very frustrating because GB News beams into Scotland. For example, the Reform Party, which barely exists in Scotland, we got 3 times as many votes as them at the last Scottish election, despite them having an MSP and spending far more money than we did, again, in far more media coverage. We got 3 times as many votes as them. Yet GB News beams the Reform Party into to viewers in Scotland week after week after week. And it's quite frustrating for us as the Scottish Family Party. Similarly, the Reclaim Party, I mean, it doesn't really exist. It's not really a political party, but it's beamed into Scotland, while the Scottish Family Party, that very definitely does exist. There was lots of supporters, a branch structure, with standing elections, but we don't get a look in at it. So, yeah, that's a bit of a frustration with GB News at the moment. Right. Oh, what do we go ahead? Okay, I'm going to write the lame stream media. Haven't heard that one before. That's a good one. Right. I like that one. Okay. Right. I thought it was a spelling mistake at first. The lamestream media are always quick to highlight how biased the state media in Russia and China are, but our own is just as bad. Yeah, I quite agree. Is it Twitter where they put a label on BBC things? I can't remember who it is. Maybe it's YouTube. They put a label on saying the BBC is the UK's state broadcaster. I'm quite right. So they should as well. Are they as bad as the Russian media? I mean, to be honest, I would just, yeah, probably not. I don't know. They're probably, yeah, maybe not as bad as in Russia. I don't know much about the media in China, but certainly the BBC exists to propagate a certain set of values that are in accord with the establishment. Now, the Conservatives might say, oh, you know, that they're a bit against us. Sort of. They're not against it economically. They're not desperately left-wing economically. But when it comes to the social issues, they're very much liberal, progressive, secular. So does that mean they're against the Conservative Party? No, really. That's what the Conservative Party is, roughly. So they'd be against sort of the fringe of the Conservative Party that is actually conservative. The BBC would be against them. But the mainstream of the Conservative Party, the BBC is basically on side with them. Right, Jesus. Right, Sawa's not being exposed for supporting trans. He's been very quiet. Right, Anna Sawa, I mean, what a mess he's in. He forced his MSPs to vote for the gender recognition reform. And then Keir Starmer said he thought 16-year-olds shouldn't be able to do that. And also now the UK government has stopped what's a very unpopular measure in Scotland, but Labour's completely missed the own goal, the open goal, by forcing their MPs to go along with it. I mean, he just made a total mess of it. I mean, Anna Sawa as well, I mean, he wears the Muslim badge. Is he representing Muslims? There's any Muslims watching tonight? I mean, is that what you want someone in Parliament for? To go and argue for gender recognition reform? So children, 16-year-olds can change gender just when they feel like it by filling the form in? No, not remotely. Yeah, so Labour in a mess. But with the gender recognition reform, though, is this what might happen? Might it be the case that basically we're going to have a Labour government next time, aren't we? I mean, barring some extremely unforeseen event, the UK government is going to be a Labour government. What will they do? Well, they will introduce some sort of gender recognition reform. Why will they do it? Because it's happening all over the world. It's happened in lots of countries already. So sort of half of them have done it. The other half will do it sooner or later. So the Labour government, they will introduce some sort of gender recognition reform, which probably won't be too different from what's already happened in Scotland, at which point the issue will get smoothed over and it will be water under the bridge and it will be, basically forgotten about. And then after who knows how many years or decades, we'll have a Conservative government again. Now, will they say, we're going to go back and change that? That was wrong. We're going to repeal it. No. The Conservatives never, ever do that. Whatever social changes there are in the so-called progressive direction, they happen more quickly under Labour, but the Conservatives never go back and put them right. They just drag their heels over the latest issue, but they never pull in the opposite direction. So, yeah, good point. Momentum in sex education in schools still gathering momentum. I would say it is. There seem to be new groups popping up left, right, and centre, addressing this issue. Now, I think modesty aside, I think it's fair to say the Scottish Family Party has been instrumental in putting this issue on the map, and a lot of other people have become very animated and motivated about it. So yes, I think there are more and more people who have seen that as an important issue. Just on that issue, we're due updated guidelines from the Scottish Government for sex education. And they've been promising for the years. I believe, in the absence of the Scottish Family Party and other campaigners, they would already have been released. But I think they're a bit twitchy. They're a bit worried, especially now with what's happened with the gender recognition reform. They will be very cautious about producing their new guidelines, because there's one thing we can guarantee about them, and that is that they'll be worse than the ones we've already got. That's just a 100% certainty. And they will be worse in the sense of sort of transgender indoctrination as well. So, yeah, I believe the government's got cold feet and they're thinking, don't really fancy bringing this out and having outrage over the issue just at the moment. So watch this space. Right, Sam Smith. Yeah, I saw his video. Oh, I saw another. I didn't even know who the bloke is, but I saw a video and I saw a picture of him in some ridiculous outfit. So you're only joking, of course, when you hope you'll be shut down over China. Right, are you in favour of scrapping university tuition fees in all European countries? They're lower than in the UK. Right, well, university tuition fees don't exist in Scotland in any case for Scottish pupils, do they? So they don't exist. Do I think that's the best way? I do, but I think there should be less places at university available. I think the university sector should shrink. At the moment, there's about half of young people go to university, and a significant number of them, they're studying courses that aren't actually going to lead them to careers that would benefit from that education. So I think higher education should contract. That you need professional people. You need people to study these various things to a high level. But at the moment, a lot of people are going to university and then following careers where their university education doesn't really have any application. Whereas a few more years of experience working or doing something practical probably would have been a lot more helpful. So that's my take on that. Well, what else has been going on? I saw a report about some philosopher somewhere advancing the idea of basically taking women who were, however you want to call it, brain dead or whatever, being kept alive on life support machines, but with no hope of regaining consciousness, and using them as sort of baby-making machines, either with or without their consent. What do you think of that? I mean, that's just, to me, sounds utterly appalling. To use someone like that is also bringing the child into the world not knowing that their natural mother. So it just seems all wrong. But generally, sadly, when you read about these things in a journal, in a philosophical journal, then give it a few years and there'll be these things gather momentum, and who knows where that will go to. But that just sounds appalling to me. Something else from academia. Again, if ever you hear someone, this man is or woman is a professor of ethics, professor of ethics, don't for a moment think, oh, right, they're a real expert in what's right and wrong. Think to yourself, they're probably someone with the most distorted views on moral issues that you've ever come across. And they're the last person you should listen to when it comes to moral issues. But this ethicist in Japan was saying basically the solution to the aging population that needs to be basically suicide or euthanasia. A bit like in Brave New World, when people get to a certain age, they go along and they're finished off, just accept it. That's what happens. It keeps the population healthy. Yeah, so someone proposing that in Japan. And again, that sort of thinking, I think, is gathering momentum. Agricultural policy. Now, that's an interesting one. We would love to develop agricultural policy. Now, I would say what we want to do is to enable as much food as possible to be produced in Scotland as cheaply as possible. I think farming is very over-regulated. I was talking to someone a few months ago who was involved in sort of environmental monitoring of farming. And he said some of the standards that were applied were so strict that they would be costing farmers a fortune. And yet the strictness, the extremely low levels that were allowed of these various chemicals were so low. They were miles away from any level that could possibly do any harm to anything. And yet they're imposing huge costs on farms. So I think that would need to stop. I think the drive towards vegetarianism, again, is going to harm Scottish farming very significantly. So there's a start for agricultural policy. But Simon, if you'd like to suggest some policies to us or speak to us about that, we will be delighted to hear from you. Email contact@scottishfamily.org, and we will be happy to look into that. I think farming at the moment with the Greens, it's as though, it's sort of demonized, isn't it? Because instead of leaving the earth in its natural state, which is the way it's supposed to be, these farmers come and do bad things like plow it up and plant seeds unnaturally, and they have animals and kill them for me. I mean, the Greens, they just don't like that, because it's not just growing flowers in a field for the bees to come and pollinate or something. And I think that sort of attitude, anti-farming attitude, is quite insidious. What's going on in the Netherlands just seems outrageous, where the Dutch government is trying to shut down roughly half of the farms in the Netherlands to cut down pollution. Now, they're still going to eat just as much food, so the food's going to be grown and produced somewhere. So I don't know why they think it's going to produce less pollution somewhere else, but that's what they're doing. But in terms of meat eating and its environmental damage, I'm very skeptical. I just don't get it. I mean, if you've got a sheep on the side of a Scottish hillside, munching the grass and then making some lovely meat to eat, what exactly is the environmental damage there? I don't quite see it. So, yeah, well, there's a few thoughts from my lack of expertise. But yeah, Simon, we'd be delighted to hear from you. Yes, indeed it is. From the perspective of these academics, though, they just look at everything in a very cold, calculated manner, and anything to do with the value of human life, or the what's natural and good, particularly that the interests of children, don't really come into it. It's about what can we do so that adults can get what they want, and one of the things they might want is a child. So it's society's, it's technology's job to give these adults what they want, including if that's a child. And the thought of what does the child need, that doesn't really come into it. Right, Sam again. So an organic market gardener, food production and food security are so important. Right, food security. I didn't mention that one, did I? Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think in general, there's been an awakening in recent years to the idea that, okay, if you can get something slightly cheaper from halfway around the world and you're totally reliant on it, this is maybe not such a good idea, because something might happen that means that can't get delivered to you anymore. That supply is interrupted. And if that causes huge problems to you, then, well, that's a huge problem. So building in resilience and security is very important, including for food. Now, I think making the UK self-sufficient for food, I'm not sure that would be realistic at the moment, but something we should be working towards to increase our food security. The same goes with energy as well. So the fossil fuel energy we're going to use, as much of that as possible should be sourced within Great Britain. This just seems common sense, because we're not going to use any more or less if we buy it from somewhere else. So we should have it from our own sources. So yeah, thank you. Loads of ideas. Hear from me soon. Right, looking forward to it. Contact@scottishfamily.org. That would be great. Right, Mr. Stars. Right, do you have a policy on drugs? What's your stand on legalizing cannabis? Our policy on drugs is we would oppose any legalization of drugs. With cannabis in particular, I think it's something that has a negative effect on people. It is addictive in many cases. People who take cannabis often go on to take other drugs. And you know the general pictures. People who take cannabis often they can't sort of get their life in gear, and they just sort of flounder around, don't achieve very much, and often end up reliant on the state. But of course, from certain people's perspective, they think, no choices are more valid than any other choices. It's up to the individual to choose their own path through life, and it's judgmental to say anything about them. Well, we disagree with that. I mean, choosing the life of sort of drug-induced inactivity or whatever, ineffectiveness, lack of contribution to society is not an acceptable choice. So we oppose legalizing cannabis. I mean, I even, this is not family party policy, talking off the top of my head. Rather, there might even been a case for banning vaping when it first came along. Because the conventional wisdom, people vape instead of smoking cigarettes. So that's far better. How stupid to ban vaping. Vaping doesn't do you much harm at all. Far safer than smoking cigarettes. But what's happened? It's not that just some people stop smoking and vape instead. There's a massive, massive explosion of vaping, particularly among young people. So you've got, I would guess, hundreds of thousands of people who are becoming basically nicotine addicts through vaping. And over the years, one would imagine that the health risks of that are going to become more and more apparent. And overall, introducing vaping wasn't such a good thing after all. So, yeah, overall, I think maintaining strict laws against drugs is what we want. I think it's a family party. Do we want children to grow up in a context where psychoactive, addictive drugs are freely available for them to experiment with? Do we want a culture where they feel, let's give it a try, let's experiment a bit, see how it goes? No. I think you struggle to find many parents at all who say, fine with the kids coming across drug dealers, and it's all part of growing up. Well, for other kids, it's all part of things going very wrong as well. Medicinal, if something is tested as a medicine, then it ought to be available as a medicine. I've always thought that's uncontroversial, so that would be fine. Growing meat in labs, I'm not sure what I think about that. The idea of producing food in unnatural ways doesn't sit well with me, I have to say, even if that was some sort of plant equivalent as well. Yeah, not so keen on that myself. I wouldn't say I was totally close to it, but no, not chomping at the bit, shall we say. Okay, let's have a look. What have we got here? Right, many EU professionals have moved from England to Scotland to flee from the hostile environment and racism perpetrated by Tories. Do you believe that this has been a Sturgeon achievement? Right, I'm a bit confused there. Many EU professionals, right? I assume you mean professionals from the European Union, people who've lived in the European Union, rather than EU employees, for example. I've moved from England to Scotland to flee from the hostile environment and racism. Do you believe this has been? Right. Okay, I get you. Basically, I don't believe that. I don't believe that people from Europe have had to move from England or been induced to move from England because of racism and hostility. No. So basically, I don't believe that. So I don't believe it's a Sturgeon achievement. No. So that's that. Right. What have we got? Another message from Jupiter. Well, like all the other net zero policies, send the jobs abroad, re-import, causing more CO2, makes zero difference to the environment. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I was saying about earlier on, it's like if there's you've got a really serious illness and they send along a beautician to try and fix it, just to make you look a bit better on the outside. That's sort of like with environmental policies as well. I was talking about this the other week, and I think that the consensus approach, the groupthink, if you like, is very misguided in a lot of ways. One of the things I've kept thinking about recently is this idea that there are some problems where everyone trying to do their little bit just doesn't work. It isn't going to be effective. It's like if you live in by a beach and the beach has been eroded by the sea and there's going to be no beach left. So you say, right, every morning I'm going to go out with my bucket and spade, and I'm going to spend half an hour filling my bucket with sand, taking it back up to the end of the beach, and therefore, counteracting the erosion. And it's not just me, I'm going to get all my friends to do it as well. That's possible. Someone could look at that, do the sums, and say, even if the whole world's population did that continually for 24 hours a day, 365, it still would make virtually no difference. Then there's no point doing it. And other things to do with climate change, they seem to be in that category. That the sort of little steps individuals and even governments try to make, they don't actually make much difference. So we need to look in the longer term. I think that the harms of climate change policy can be felt very, very quickly, but the benefits are often so minuscule and so far in the future that it's quite difficult to balance them against the immediate harms. If you need a drug czar, give us a shout. Right, okay. If you've got some expertise in the area, yeah, email contact@scottishfamily.org, and we can see. Yeah, academics coming out with evil ideas. They are indeed. I mean, the famous one in ethics was Peter Singer, who said that a newborn baby is of less moral worth than a cat, because a cat is more independent and intelligent. So therefore, your pet cat is of greater value than your newborn baby. So assume if the house is on fire, you should rescue your cat and leave the baby to burn. That's what Peter Singer would say. A hugely influential figure, humanist of the year, etc. To get to eat insects. Yeah, well, I was seeing some of that the other day. A picture of another insect approved for human consumption. I have to confess, I have eaten insects. Well, more than once, actually. Years ago, we were in London. I went to Harrods and bought a chocolate bar with ants in it. Pictures of ants on the outside. You couldn't taste them. It just felt a bit gritty, the chocolate. And I've had these funny ones that you get from sort of joke shops, and you sort of dare each other to eat them. I mean, if someone was saying they were going to put insects in some other food, I didn't really know it was there. Still don't fancy it. Don't fancy it at all, really. It's interesting, though, because I think in all societies, there are taboos about what you eat. Like here, for example, horse meat. We just think, oh, no, or eating a cat and a dog would seem really appalling. But you go to other countries, and they have completely different taboos. Like you don't eat cows, you don't eat pigs, or various other things. So having some sort of taboos about what you eat, it seems like a human universal, which is quite interesting. I won't go down that avenue, but it's quite interesting to think about. Why would that be? That it seems that all societies have some apparently irrational taboos about what you can eat and what you can't eat, which maybe serves some useful purpose. But insects, they're certainly in the taboo column for me at the moment. Right, death for dealing drugs and importation, 20 years for possession. Well, yeah, I think sterner penalties. Because at the moment for possession, the punishment is likely to be something in the region of like nothing. Isn't it? That's quite normal. And then the police. But there's two ways that law gets made, sort of, in Scotland. One way is they pass it through the Parliament to get scrutinised and publicised. The other way is they just tell the police, okay, this is the law, but don't actually do anything about it. Just ignore it. You've probably heard me say before, if you go for a walk around Edinburgh for an hour, not just in the city centre, anywhere in Edinburgh, there's a pretty good chance you'll smell cannabis somewhere. It really is an epidemic. It's all over the place. And yeah, I agree. It needs to be stopped. You don't like passive vaping? Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Cannabis isn't a drug that's beneficial to one's health. Look at the studies. Yeah, I think there are a lot of health dangers associated with cannabis. I would say even if there weren't, just the fact there's taking people down the road of basically drug addiction, however you define it, but drug use like that, which tends to lead to problems in the longer term. Now, I know there's the CBD oil, isn't there, which is a cannabis extract, which is not a psychoactive substance. that some people claim medicinal effects from. So that's a different thing altogether. That's not a psychoactive drug. But yes, I completely agree that there is a problem there. Vaping seems to affect your ability to breathe. I think with vaping, but there's no doubt it's not going to be good for people. Let's put it that way. There's going to be some harms that are going to emerge from it in the longer term. Alcohol is far worse. I think with alcohol, you've got to compare. You're comparing something that's legal, so therefore extremely widespread, compared to something that's more restricted. But if you could press a button now, if no one had ever invented alcoholic drinks, and they invented them now, and we had to debate, should we make these things legal? I think probably the decision would be no. Would the world be a better place for it? I would suggest probably yes, overall. But discuss. Let's see what you think. I would not be against trying insects, but certainly can't be your main diet. You'd fade away. In some countries, you can have fried tarantula, for example, nice sauces. I believe very tasty, although personally never tried. I can't. It's too much like an Indiana Jones film for me to try and eat a spider. I can't imagine that. SOP should oppose the establishment's insect agenda. Well, yeah, maybe that's something we should consider. The whole energy, green agriculture, this whole area, it's something we've been looking at recently. We're looking to develop more policies in it going forward. So let's say that is under discussion. Right. There, we just have a look down the comments. Here's another one. Glasgow ULEZ zone. That's the ultra low emission zone coming into force in June. I would say, never mind Glasgow. What about Edinburgh? That's coming in force June next year, which is going to mean that I can't drive my car into the city centre. So I think it will mean I won't be able to drive my own car to church on a Sunday, for example, which is about sort of 2 miles, a couple of miles away on the way into Edinburgh. I won't be able to use my car around Edinburgh. And so it won't affect people with lots of money. Obviously, you've got a newer car, just get a new car. That's fine. People running cherished vehicles of a greater vintage that happen to be diesel, bought probably because at the time the government was encouraging people to buy diesel cars, are going to find suddenly they can't drive around the city centre in them. So yeah, I'm very sceptical about the whole thing. I don't think it's a good idea. And I think there's a very strong anti-car movement, isn't there? So if it's not climate change, it's pollution or it's safety. The thing that got me was they were saying, electric vehicles, we can't have electric vehicles because they give out emissions from their tyres. These little particles of rubber or something come off the tyres, and it's dangerous to breathe them in. It's not so bad for small cars, but for big cars, it's a real health hazard. And I thought, is it really? Or are these people just so determined? They just don't like cars. Partly because they don't like the idea of individualism. You own something that's not the same as everyone else's. You own something that's different from other people's, and you can go wherever you like, whenever you want to, without the government having any say in it. You're free in your own car to express yourself and go to where you want to. Now, for me, I think for a lot of people, they say that's really important. That's a very important thing. That's something you would defend quite strongly. But then for other people, they don't really like that. They want everyone to be the same and to be organised and to be moved around in batches in proper sort of socialist style. So, yeah, there's a lot more to that. Hatred of human beings come from? Well, I think you're right. I think there is a hostility to humans. I think it is an environmental movement that's basically so out of balance, I suppose, because they don't value human life. You can see that they don't regard human life as an inherent intrinsic good. So therefore, when other things come along, like the lives of elephants or trees or whatever, then they just make different decisions with those regards. Right, the orange order. I have to say I like your icon there, Murray. You're looking very smart in your red coat there. In fact, Oh, I was just going to show you one of mine off the shelf, but they're in storage at the moment. So, thoughts on the Orange Order? I don't know much about it. I would say I think in terms of sectarianism in Scotland is very unfortunate and very irrational, and I hope a lot of the hostility will recede into history. But I think for some people, it's still a very powerful thing. Now, obviously, Catholics are Catholics, Protestants are Protestants. I'm not saying they should, sort of hold hands and all believe the same things, or say it doesn't matter which one you are or whatever. Fine, people believe what they believe, and they can believe it very, very strongly. But I think with the sectarian thing is that the issue is keeping alive a hostility from really generations ago and sustaining it into the present without any real basis. So I would want to avoid that where possible. Now, the Orange Order, someone would say the very raison d'etre of the Orange Order is to be anti-Catholic. I'm sure people in the Orange Order would probably say that's not the case at all. We're just here to celebrate our own traditions and to be a sort of identity club or whatever. If it's the latter, that sounds fine to me. But I think with the Rangers Celtic thing, you see things from both sides of supporters that are pretty unpleasant. So I think these sort of tensions exist in lots of different societies, and that's Scotland's version of it. In my opinion, there are some people who are a bit prone to liking a group to turn against. They're like an enemy group to demonize and to not necessarily physically fight with, but they like to have an enemy, a type of person that they turn against and can be hostile to. I think that's just something in the human psyche. And I think for some people that runs out of control. I think the positive side of that emotion, that feeling, inclination, whatever, could be sometimes your group needs defending against outside groups. So that sort of emotion is a valuable one. But in other contexts, it becomes problematic, shall we say. So I'll leave it at that. Right. Thanks, Maria. I'll leave that there. You chip in a bit more if you want me to add more. Cannabis associated with schizophrenia. Yeah. I always find with drug abuse, there's some people who are in the phase where, oh, come on, lighten up. I use drugs. It doesn't affect me. I'm fine. It's no problem. It's just, what are you so uptight about? Stop stigmatizing me. And then they move to another phase, which is, the services are terrible. Why is there not more help to help people like me stop being drug addicts? The system's letting me down. Well, okay, fair enough. We want to help people who've got themselves into that mess. But on the other hand, there needs to be personal responsibility as well. Now, it so happens, I read a book about addiction quite recently, which happens to be right here. And it's basically saying, I'll summarize them off the top of my head. Because the conventional wisdom now is that drug addiction is an illness. But the author of this book is saying, well, basically it's not. If you say to a drug addict, if you stop taking drugs, I'll give you £1 billion, they could virtually all do it. Okay. If you've got some other illness, okay, if you've got some sort of heart disease, and someone says, if I give you £1 billion, can you stop having heart disease? No, you can't. So why is it that drug addicts, so-called, can choose to stop when the incentives are right? And the other thing he's saying as well, it's very, very interesting. He's saying there's the idea that, kicking a drug addiction is really, really hard. And the reason they think that is because the people who work with drug addicts, they only meet the people who couldn't stop on their own. A much more common story is for someone to become a drug user, a drug addict, or it depends how you define it, whatever, maybe through their 20s, but maybe by the time they get to the late 20s, they start thinking, right, this is not working out. I want to settle down. I want to get married. I want to have kids. I need a job. So this is not what I want anymore. I need to stop. And lo and behold, what they do? They stop. In other words, when the balance of motivations, the balance of their self-interest tips against continuing to be a drug addict, a substantial majority of addicts just stop of their own accord. I'm not saying it's necessarily easy for them to stop, but they do. And they never appear in research. They never appear in the government statistics, they stop on their own. Then there's some people who can't do that, can't muster the willpower, or there might be other factors. I don't know. I'm not trying to be unsympathetic, just descriptive. Those are the people who find themselves going along to the specialists, and therefore the specialists say it's really hard to kick drug habits, because the people they're dealing with are basically people who failed already to do it. So that's yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Funny how they refuse the proper medicines, insist on the psychoactives, to the route to legalize drugs. Yeah, and the Scottish government will legalize cannabis sooner or later, because it's just absolutely in tune with their philosophy. I mean, the Greens, they would legalize everything. The Lib Dems as well. Are they general legalizers? I'm not sure. Certainly cannabis, they are. And the SNP, basically the SNP would be the Greens, but they're just a bit cautious because they're not sure the electorate can swallow it. So they just need to take it easy. But the SNP the Greens are what the SNP would like to be if they thought they could get away with this electorally. Insects in foods already agreed in the EU. Yeah, I think I saw something about that. Maybe it was today even. A contract's been given to a company to provide insect powder that will go into all sorts of foods. Right. Okay. Don't fancy them. I have had snails, mind you. I mean, that's pretty disgusting on the scale of things, isn't it? I mean, a snail's just like a slug with a shell, isn't it? And I've eaten those. Still. The Scottish Family Party needs education on cannabis. Your views from brainwashing. I'm not quite sure what you're saying there. Have another try at that one, and I will get you. Wine and moderation allowed in Scripture, but not drunkenness or strong drink. Yeah. So when it comes to education, the one needs to be presented to young people is the two options of either not drinking alcohol or being responsible. And Scottish Family Party, in fact, says that the government should try and take a cultural lead that drunkenness isn't acceptable. Because the politicians, they all want, Scotland needs a new relationship with alcohol. We need to educate people. But what they will never do is challenge people. So they'll say, if people just understood how many units of alcohol there were in a bottle of Buckfast, then that would really help them. Or if it just cost 10 pence more, no, that's not the issue. The issue is it needs some moral leadership. I mean, would they dare say, right, actually getting drunk is not good. It's inherently irresponsible and it's causing a lot of problems in Scotland. So we don't encourage that. And we're going to set an example that we don't think that's good. They wouldn't dare. They wouldn't dare because the backlash would be huge and they're too worried about being popular. Also, the emission zones revenues will lead to more poverty, absolutely high prices. Yep. Job losses, yes. Business closures, yes. Yeah, absolutely. But the government, do they even understand those things? Do they care about them? But they're not going to, when they do their press conference and they'll say this is going to reduce a certain type of pollution by 2% or whatever, okay, they'll get a clap for that. But these negative effects, I think a lot of the electorate even, they don't understand them. No one can quite be certain how much of the extra cost of your window cleaner or whatever is because of the ultra low emission zone. So it's the costs get hidden, but the small benefits are there for everyone to see. Okay, it's 10 o'clock. Time flies. Time flies. 20-mile-an-hour limit in Edinburgh has been around for a while now. What's your thoughts being an Edinburgh resident? I think it's silly. I think it's ridiculously low. It feels like you could get out and walk. It's far too slow. I mean, the argument that they go by, it's always, if you make the cars go slower, it's safer. Well, of course it is. But why not 10 miles an hour? Why not 5 miles an hour? So I think in the grand compromise of appropriate speeds to be driving around in Edinburgh, I think 30 miles an hour on urban main roads is quite safe. Quite safe. Nothing's going to be perfectly safe, but it's quite safe. Right, let's bottle recycling scheme. I talked about that briefly at the beginning, so I won't go back to that. We've got comments coming in. Is there just one last one? I think maybe we're We're about there. So they demand square wheels next. Very possibly. Very possibly. That reminds me of the oh God, for a tangent slightly. When the Mercedes Formula One team was at its peak in the 1950s, Stirling Moss was driving for them, and he wanted to explain how methodical they were in their approach. And he said, if he said to the boss, he said, how about trying square wheels? He said the boss would either say, we tried those in 1947 and they didn't work, or the next day they'd have them on the car and they'd be trying them out. So yeah, square wheels next. Who knows? Who knows what's coming? Right, me too. It was good to good to get to the comments a bit more. We've been toying with the idea with a live stream of doing more than one a week. Maybe do one with a special guest and do one with more audience interaction, or maybe do a 2-hour live stream, half with a guest, half with more audience interactions. So we've been mulling that over, because there's lots of other people in the family party who can do the live stream as well. So we're considering that. We shall see. We think it'd be good to put out more content. One thing I didn't mention earlier on, we're still on Facebook's naughty step, big time. I mean, I think maybe it's me in particular. When I post things on Scottish Family Party Facebook, virtually no one sees them. It's been like that for a week. I think we've maybe got another week till we're out of Facebook jail there, which is quite concerning in a way, because we've got no way of predicting what Facebook will take exception to. There doesn't seem any rhyme or reason to it. So watch this space. But if you do rely on Facebook to keep up with the Scottish Family Party, do go to our website, sign up for the newsletter. Really important. Do not rely on Facebook to communicate with you, because, I mean, who knows what's going to happen with the family party and Facebook in the future. Right. It was great to spend an hour with you. Look forward to seeing you next week. We do have a special guest next week whose identity has slipped my mind. I can't remember. We've got a couple of we've got a lot of special guests lined up for the weeks to come. But thanks for your comments, and see you next week. Good night.